I'm Aaron Sagers, and this is Talking Strange. Aloha, spooky nerds, and welcome to Talking Strange, a paranormal pop culture show with the Den of Geek network. As always, I'm your host, journalist, author, researcher of weird things, Aaron Sagers. You can also catch me on 28 Days Haunted on Netflix and Paranormal Caught On Camera, now airing its sixth season on Travel Channel, Max, and the Discovery Plus streaming services. And today we're going to the mall, although it is the Dead Mall, of course, the horror comic Dead Mall. And let me tell you a little bit about it if you haven't caught up with this comic yet. So the Penn Mills Galleria is about to be demolished. Yet 5 teens have snuck into the mall to take a last look before it is gone. However, while Penn Mills has been closed for years, the mall is far from abandoned. A night of exploration becomes a shopping spree from hell, and the teens must contend with the sprawling, transformative, cosmic horror of Penn Mills or be trapped forever within the Dead Mall. And this Dark Horse Comics trade paperback is available now, and I am joined by the creative team of Adam Cesare and artist David Stoll. Hey, guys.
How's it going?
Hey, Aaron, thanks for having us. That was a hell of an introduction. God, smooth on your own stuff too, and then like right into the pitch. That's ooh.
Thank you.
Can you come to conventions with us? And
yeah, honestly,
yeah.
The book.
Yeah, I'm always like, it's about a mall that eats people. It's like it's like how I try to get people passing by. That's so much better.
Well, I think we will all be at New York Comic Con, so who knows? Maybe we'll get a chance to.
Oh man, I wish.
Well, I want to first kick things off by just learning a little bit about your guys' collaborative relationship. How did you meet, and how did you set off on the Dead Mall adventure together? Adam, you want to kick off with that?
Yeah, I think David can probably speak to it a little better because the person that put us in touch is a David person. But we'd been put in touch by another artist, and this is I've done a lot of prose writing. I write a lot of novels and novellas, and I've done a little bit of comics writing, and it's all been IP. It's all been stuff that other people own. It's been stuff like Dark Crystal and Power Rangers, and did an Adventure Time comic. But I love the medium, and I wanted to do my own comic. And it was like, I didn't 100% know how to do it or have that many contacts. So Dark Horse, our editors at Dark Horse, kind of made up a list. And on that list was I don't know how to say Phil's name. Is Philip Sevi? Yep. Philip Sevi basically was like I'm slammed. He does X-Men now. He's doing the Marvel Unlimited X-Men run on that. I think he's doing the Venomverse now on Marvel Unlimited, but he was like, you got to see David Stoll's portfolio. And like this, it was one of those things where it was like within 20 minutes, I was like asking the editor, like, yes, let's get in touch with Dave. Let's see what his calendar's like. So it's one of those. I mean, we've grown a collaborative relationship. I think a really great collaborative relationship, but it started just in like a kind of referral of like, look at his portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those stories that really works out networking wise, which doesn't always happen in the comics industry. But yeah, Phil is a really good friend of mine. We went to school together, and he's working on this Marvel Infinite stuff. And so he was like, hey, I have a book offer from Dark Horse. It's a horror book with Adam Cesare. At the time I wasn't like fully familiar with Adam's stuff yet, but Phil was like, he did this awesome book, Clown in a Cornfield, like go check it out. And I did. And like, right as I finished the book, they got in touch with me. And so I was immediately able to be like, yep, absolutely. Please. Yes. Which is,
I like it on both of our ends. We were like, yeah.
No, it worked out. It was one of those like serendipitous kind of timing moments because I slammed through that book. Clown in a Cornfield is so good. If you haven't read it, go check it out, please, because it is A+. And I read it in a couple of days, and literally that's when I got the email from Dark Horse, and was just like, I am so excited about this. How do I accept this without seeming way too desperate about it? But it just kind of worked out like that. And then from there, yeah, like Adam said, our collaborative relationship was kind of blossomed and grown into this terrifying nightmare thing, which is wonderful to behold.
Yeah. With the art. So as Adam said, a lot of his writing has been books and novellas, and then the comic stuff has been existing IP. So there's already this established world of, Dark Crystal and Power Rangers and whatnot. So David, when you were having those initial conversations about the overall aesthetic of Dead Mall, what were some of the things that you were bouncing off of one another, and how this horror book and horror world and cosmic horror world would look?
I think right from the get-go, we tried to walk kind of this tight line act between we didn't want our monsters to be zombies. We didn't want them to be Cenobites. We didn't want to just be like, here's another, property that you're completely familiar with. Our horror was kind of nestled in the personal stories of kind of the characters that were transformed in the book, right? So right off the bat, our art direction and our visual process for like the monsters and the mall and things like that were very heavily centered and focused on what those things had been through kind of in the past, right? For the mall itself, I wanted to build up a mall that looked like our childhood malls. We had a phone conversation about how both of us grew up with malls and things like that. I really wanted to bring that nostalgia in, and so my partner and I went and researched malls by literally going to malls and walking through, pacing out measurements of architecture, in shopping malls and things like that. And then I came home and I built the Penn Mills Gallery. I have a 3D model of that mall, and so I had that to work from. I based the floor plan around a pentagram because I just wanted to be spooky about it, and then from there, from having a mall to kind of work with each monster that we kind of brought up in the script, Adam and I would go back and forth with like, this is the torment that this monster is going through for a very specific reason, and it has to be reflected in the design of the monster. Yeah. So we didn't want to just kind of like hinge on normal. We're both huge fans of normal horror stereotypes, right? Zombies and Cenobites, et cetera, and so there are a lot of those elements pulled into the design of the monsters, but the monsters' designs themselves were very personal to each monster. So it was kind of like a case by case basis as we went. And as far as like the overall design sense, the overall art sense of the whole thing, I just kind of tried to lean into having it be as derelict as possible until it was as spooky as possible.
It was really cool in the trade paperback. That you do the schematics and the 3D design, the layout of the mall is included. So it was such a nice touch because it, even though I don't think you have to apply logic to every fiction piece, it is cool when it works out in that way. It's like almost, you have the map to Middle Earth listed there.
Yeah. It was actually really funny because there are a bunch of moments in the comic where the layout of the mall doesn't necessarily make sense, and that's because the mall is constantly changing around
it's moving pieces, it's moving people from different places. Like yeah, I guess we haven't really established that the mall is like telling the story. Like the mall is in the book, like the mall is the narrator, and the mall is like very much a character. So like the mall is the force that they're fighting against, and it's moving these kids around and showing them these different monsters it's created. And the fact that David, I don't want to cut you off, David, but like I just want to give some context to that 3D model where David and I had kind of started our relationship very like, gingerly, and you don't know you don't want to overstep another professional's like area of expertise or their like comfort level with commitment, where I was putting together all this pre-writing material for myself, like old pictures of malls, and you there's a time travel element to the story. So you see the mall as it was in the 60s, as it was in the 70s, as it was in the 80s, as it was in the 2000s. And I was just doing a ton of image searching and finding all this different stuff and making like slideshows and stuff. And then I started to hand that to David, and I was like, how insane am I going to come off if I show the artist who's, he's in charge of the visual side of things, the hundreds of images that I've archived of malls. And then at the same time, it was kind of like an ironic thing of like I handed him that, and then he handed me, he had already gone in and built a 3D model of the mall. And I'm like, oh, we are both as all in as you can get on this concept. Like, it was like, here's my bunch of archival photos, and it's like, here's the 3D model of the mall I built by getting on, the NSA's lists by walking around this mall and pacing it out, and they think I'm casing the jewelry store. Like, so it was, we were both fully committed to the bit is what I just am in such admiration of David's artistic ability.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. I love the idea of Adam coming with a big folder of things and just being like, is this too much? And then I turn around with a 3D model.
And Adam, where is the Penn Hills Galleria Mall? Because obviously, the most famous mall horror story is Dawn of the Dead, and that's Monroeville Mall, and then maybe the second most famous is Chopping Mall, and I forget where that's set. But
that's the Galleria. That's in LA. That's
LA.
Right outside LA, and which is it shows up in a million movies, especially a million horror movies. Like there's a long. I think it's called the Galleria. I'm East Coast, so but it's I know it's all the same mall. There's in Mausoleum. There's a huge extended sequence where they're in a mall. So like all horror films of that era. If you were in LA, you were like, oh, just go shoot at the same mall. Like, so
is this I know you're based in Philly. So is this a Philly mall? Is this a Pittsburgh mall? Where is
it's an amalgam of it's a Philly area, Philly suburbs mall. I love the malls around here. My wife, my sainted wife, I'm not from the area originally. I'm from Long Island. So there's a little bit of Long Island in it too. And it's this amalgam of different places. It like technically, canonically is located outside of Philly. But every time we pull into a mall parking lot, I'm like sitting in the car and I'm like looking up the Wikipedia for the mall. I'm like, I want to know what the anchor stores were. Oh, there was a Strawbridge's here actually up until 85. Like, so like I'm weirdly obsessive with mall stuff. So like, the fact that I was that way for so long, and then we were like, you know what, let's do the ultimate mall horror comic. And we're very much playing in that sandbox of mall horror, of Chopping Mall, of Dawn of the Dead. And it just, to me, it didn't seem like there were enough mall horror things because I love them so much. And I've gone to Monroeville. I've done that, that pilgrimage. So it's a lot of different places, but it definitely is an East Coast mall it was the general, aesthetic that we were going for.
Well, as you're approaching this from your perspective, what are the elements of a good mall horror, even though this is not the thing that we've seen before as the staples of the genre? What makes for a good mall horror?
To me, and I love that it, I'm talking about like the cinematic genre of mall horror, I think is the safest way to talk about this. And when I watch films, and especially horror films, I don't tend to watch a ton of newer stuff. I try to keep up as best I can. I tend to watch things from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I like the kind of time capsule element to genre filmmaking, and especially these movies were usually regional films. Like, Romero and his Pittsburgh crew were filming around Pittsburgh in those time periods. And you get to see, with Hollywood movies, you're seeing backlots, or you're seeing sets, or you're seeing the same places in Hollywood. With regional filmmaking, you're seeing snapshots of different parts of America as they were. And I love that about this kind of genre, and just generally film. So that's if a good mall horror movie is showing me a lot of the mall, like something like Phantom of the Mall, Eric's Revenge, like maybe not the world's greatest film, but you do get to see you get to see a Sam Goody in it, the things like that. Like I it's a weird thing to prize that in a piece of fiction, but I do really enjoy that. And I think we wanted to give that feeling to this with that time travel element of, it's not photorealistic. It's impressionistic. It's nostalgic in a way that David's rendering it through his pen, but we wanted to make you feel like you're there a little bit and have form and function. Cause it's part of the story is the idea of like your time is moving on and you might get stuck in a certain area. So I think that as much as I love nostalgia and as much as these are all movies behind me, I love watching movies and I love getting kind of stuck in those time periods. There is like that sense of atrophy to it. There's that sense of like, don't stare too long into nostalgia because you're going to miss what's going on now. And I think that's part of the story too.
I was thinking about this as I was reading the books, reading the trade paperback, and we have malls show up in like Stranger Things, where it's a nice, shiny new mall. And then more recently, Last of Us, where it's, we're getting this post-apocalyptic or, 20 years in the future mall in shambles. But this kind of mall is, I think, it's fascinating to me because it's like a modern haunted house. It's an artifact of 20th century and part of your early part of 21st century. But instead of the creepy, Victorian house in the neighborhood, or this is the modern artifact, the modern haunted house. And that, I think, is such an interesting approach. And it's really not something that we've seen a lot of before. I kind of just want to get your reaction, both of your reactions to that. And David, specifically, when you speak to it, just is there an extra bit of thrill of making the haunted house this modern architecture and this temple of consumerism? But Adam, why don't you start on that?
Oh, I mean, I think David nailed it. And I think what you're saying is I haven't ever put it that way. And I don't think either of us have put it that way, but I think there's so much intentionality there. There's a splash page in the first issue where we see the kids are basically starting a fire and they're going to drink beer. And you turn the page and you see it up and you see up into the skylights. And it's very, I think I would say deliberately, it looks like a cathedral. It looks like almost, Renaissance architecture, this idea of like, this was an important place. This was a gathering place, like the in the 80s, the new town square kind of thing. And now it's gone. Now we don't really have that. And they're standing in the shell of it. I want to hear David's take on this because I think that was beautifully put, Aaron. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I love the wording temple to consumerism, just because I feel like what I really loved pushing and pulling out of this book was this kind of idea of hunger. And you can equate that to consumerism and capitalism and everything like that. But, malls in our era were this bastion of you could get whatever you wanted in one location. Right. And that was largely why, we went and hung out at malls, was because there was everything there. It was Adam talked about it as a town square. It was where you went to meet up with everything. And it was where we went to access, everything that we could think about. And there's just this kind of like gluttony is a really strong word for it. But when my partner and I were going out to measure out malls and make jewelry store attendants nervous, we spend a lot of time in, especially like Mills malls, which are shaped like rings, specifically just to make you pass the same stores over and over again, right? It's all set up to draw your eye and to make you consume and to make you buy things and participate in this mall culture. And it is very, very hungry. And combining that with this nostalgic sense of things are now passing in time, right? Especially, the Penn Mills Galleria is on its last legs. It doesn't even have legs anymore. It's decrepit and falling apart. And to have this bastion to hunger be in a state where it is now desperately hungry is where the horror of our book comes from. And so, horror elements aside, just kind of tapping into that idea of, we come from this culture that is all about consuming and buying and having more, and to be in that culture as it gets older and it gets maybe more desperate and more kind of clingy a little bit, is such a really nice thread to pull through a horror book. And I think that's primarily, that hunger, that greed, and that desperation is primarily what I really tried to pull into the genre with the mall horror. I feel like that's where the mall horror really, really sticks for me.
Yeah. So it's also nicely reflective of the sort of the labyrinth nature of malls, because yes, as you said, it's also a little bit like a casino. It's intended to keep you there, and you can lose track of time. Not a lot of natural sunlight coming in, but there is this whole world of hallways and tunnels and nooks and crannies in this backstage world that exists outside of the kind of the front, the neon facade.
They don't want you to see. It's just like it all has to feed the beast and has to keep it living, but it's all back hallways and stuff like that.
Literally
the guts.
Yeah, the guts, which we, as we get into issue 3, you see guts. So I love that. And I think there's also an element here that I was just in a bookstore yesterday. I just did a bookstore event in support of another author, and the bookstore was like very happy to show me they had like a shelf talker and they had Dead Mall out, and they were like, they had it in the teen section, because I think Dark Horse has it listed however they list the metadata of like teen graphic novel, and I think they do that partly because that's how I pitched it, which was funny. I was like, because my books, Clown of the Cornfield, all 3 of the Clown of the Cornfield books are teen horror novels that almost, like, I'd say 60-70% of like the readership I know about are adults. So it's one of those that they're crossover things, but they are technically teen books. They're about teens. And I pitched this as a teen thing. And then as soon as I started handing in script pages, there were things happening in the book that didn't, I guess, to the editors seem very teen-like, or they didn't think, they thought it was either too violent or too sweary or too sexual. And they were like, oh, I thought this was a teen book. And I was like, no, it is. So I think that stayed. And I think it was so interesting to see it next to these other teen kind of candy color teen graphic novels on this bookshelf. Because to me, I'm like, oh, it's Dark Horse. It's a thing, but it is hard. It is a teen story, and it is about teens. And I think there's that hunger as consumerists, but there's also, you were like searching for another word other than gluttony. There's the idea of like longing. And I think it's all these characters that we have it's the reason, a big reason a lot of us would go to malls. And it's like, if you were a mall rat and if you were hanging out for any extended period of time, your mom dropped you off or whoever, you're not supervised and you're seeing kids that you normally see in school, or just like that idea of like, of longing to either in a romantic way or in just a belonging and wanting a friend. And there's something to that, being in that atmosphere, that kind of casino like architecture as trap, but you also have your entire layer of teen motives too, which is a lot of who was in malls when malls were as big as they were.
And let's talk about the monsters of this book, because we have this, as you said, we're seeing the guts of the mall, which is it's a very organic in nature. And there's this overarching, I guess, it's not a hive mind, but an overarching beast. And yet there's also these worker bees that seem to support the queen. And these monsters each have their own different personalities. And it seems like it's reflecting the lives or the deaths of what came before their monstrous selves. So walk us through some of these creatures and the creature designs, and maybe even your favorites. And this is softball for you, David, based on your shirt too. But yeah, walk us through some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's very well put. Yeah, we used them all a little bit as a, I want to say, sort of a purgatory element for our monsters, where their continued state reflects sort of a punishment for them that they wind up inflicting on themselves. Really, it's because we're talking about this longing and this hunger of the mall, but also all of the monsters, all the characters, all have this deep inner need for something, and that's what the mall feeds on, right? And so the fact that the mall walkers exist in the mall is largely due to them having fallen into the mall's traps and thus kind of falling into their own sort of eternal punishment. I think that one of my favorite creature designs is right off at the beginning is the hairdresser. Who shows up? She's not the first one to show up, but she shows up.
First issue.
Yeah, first
she's the hero monster of the first issue.
Yeah, first issue, she's the highlight monster. And she shows up and immediately just kind of launches herself at our heroes. And I remember she was maybe the longest one that I had to kind of think about, like what had she gone through. But her whole design is just kind of around her whole desire is just cutting. She just needs to tear things apart. And because of that, I gave her 4 arms. I don't know if I gave Adam like an okay.
I loved it. Didn't have 4 arms in the script. It was great though.
I just because I was like this. She just wants to cut everything apart as much as possible.
She's got a pair of scissors in each arm.
Yeah, she's got a pair of scissors in each hand. She's got 4 arms to cut with. Her skin is entirely just like scar material. She's wearing I'm not sure if you can see it very well in the book, but she's wearing a hairdresser's smock, but it's got like tears through it and everything like that. And just most of what she is just cut apart, and then she's got this huge mane of hair, which kind of speaks to the idea of she wants to cut everything and she can't cut her own hair. She can't cut this huge important part of her character, and it makes her this enigmatic kind of like wonderfully iconic monster character where she's got just this huge mane behind her and then 4 scissors and she's just coming at you like a Cuisinart. And she was I think one of my favorite monster designs. And as we go through, like that's the kind of idea that we met each monster with. There's a monster that shows up I think in the 3rd or 4th issue, but at the very beginning, his name is Koinop, and he's now just an amalgamation of arcade machines just kind of grafted into a person. And Adam and I went back and forth with the shape language on him, but he's got like a television buried in his stomach, and his eyes are coin slots, and he's got joysticks down his spine, and just kind of like what must that person have been like as a living person in order to have this as their torment is what we really wanted to invoke. And then of course there's the ball pit kids, which I made into a t-shirt because they show up and they're I think they're a part of one of the most energetic scenes in the book because it's like a big fight scene. It's really it's really scary. And these are just kids that get lost at the mall and just never picked up, and so the mall takes them and turns them into his little puppets, which he does for everybody.
Yeah, and pretty much what we've been suspecting. Kids are getting lost in ball pits. Exactly, I mean, I personally like my very young ball pit memories was like before I was worried about people peeing in the ball pits. There was like just this very young kind of fear of like it being bottomless, of it, yes, like it just going on forever. And
absolutely, that's part of the excitement of it, right? You're like, am I going to come out of this?
Yeah. So Adam, this compliments can be or comparisons can be a dangerous thing, right? However, I mean it as a compliment to say like we've got sort of shades of some Clive Barker, Hellraiser, and then of course The Shining and Overlook, the Overlook Hotel. So I was thinking about that. I was curious, is there this deeper past to this mall beyond it being a mall? I mean, did it exist in some form before it was a mall? What is the backstory and what does it ultimately want beyond feeding and victims? What does it ultimately want? So the 2-parter there.
I have answers for both these questions, and they are spoilery answers in that I think the first arc the first trade paperback tells a complete story. You could just read it I know from writing books, and I've had books that have more ambiguous world building, and I know you get slammed by readers who want to know exactly what something is, what a thing is. And a lot of times my answer is, it's just the mechanism for the story. I just like that. This time I kind of we had talked about it a little bit. We went into it knowing that people are going to be pissed if you kind of don't have a logic and a reasoning for this. I like your question on the first one. Like if the mall opened in 1964, I can't remember the exact year that the mall opens in. But it's what was it before then, and what was on that land? Very good question. Might have been something I've thought about. I do think we are going to, hopefully, in success, if everyone watching this goes and buys the trade paperback of the first one, we're going to do more, and we are going to go a little bit back in time. So I do have the incredibly anticlimactic answer to say, I know and I can't tell you, but rest assured, I have thought that far, and I do think there is that idea of cursed places, and you're in the paranormal community, you understand that idea of things older than the civilization that builds up around them. And I think that is very much something I'm interested in, very much something that David's interested in, and very much something that we've thought about this. Mm-hmm. And there's to me the most interesting thing, and the idea of what does it want as its goal. There is a somewhat of an answer at the end of this book, so we don't want to spoil that and what it wants with these 5 teens specifically. But to me, the most interesting thing about the mall's consciousness and this monster that is the mall is that everything, if malls are dying, if malls are in this country not as much of a thing as they were, how does something that's this old, that's this powerful, how is the self-preservation work? How does reproduction work? How does it move beyond its confines? And we know that through certain things in the book that it goes deeper and has maybe a root system. That's the way I think of it. I think of it almost like a plant, and almost that idea of, well, if plants and if funguses and if they have a reproductive life cycle, what would the mall's reproductive cycle be? That is something I would directly like to do in a possible follow-up to Dead Mall, which we can't announce now, but
so more stories in this world if you get the opportunity.
Yes, would love to do that, but I do want to stress that standalone element of this is Beth's story and her friend's story, and this tells that complete story.
Yeah.
But if we were going to deal with the mall again and deal with this life force that is the mall, I would love to do other stuff, and I think David would like to do other stuff too.
Oh, 100%. Go buy the book, please.
Yeah.
Well, you both said that you were each mall rats, and I'm curious about the kind of mall rats that you may have been. What was the mall hangout? I mean, were you the I don't know, I forget the Breakfast Club, all the labels, but perhaps jocks. I mean,
we were both jocks. So
yes. Where would we find you at the mall doing what? David, why don't you start?
So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, which means that summers were 110 to 115, 120 if it was real bad. And so that meant that we didn't like going outside. So the mall was literally the next thing to do, right? You're not going out playing soccer or football or whatever. So instead I was, we had a local comic shop. It was called Atomic Comics, and I wore holes in that carpet. And then, we had our cycle, right? When you go to a mall constantly enough, you have the walk that you do all the time, right? So I think that we would start from Barnes and Noble and go on over to Spencer's, and then walk over to the puppy store, right, where you could pet dogs, and then back around to the food court, and just kind of whatever cash we had on hand would get something that everybody could snack on. But it was definitely a friend hangout, just kind of like a after school or Saturday afternoon sort of thing. Where, well, what do you do? Well, we don't want to go out in the sun, so let's go inside, please. And then that's where we went.
How about you, Adam?
Similar, but I always find it fascinating about David's origin story that his comic book store was in a mall, because my comic book stores were all freestanding, like Main Street USA kind of things, and I feel like I never associate them with like comics with malls, but it's great for hell of an origin story for the comic artist.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I was very much a media guy and very much the mall had within our mall, the South Shore Mall on Long Island, we had a software, etc., an electronics boutique. And then as a satellite store to the mall on a separate thing, we had Circuit City and Funcoland. So the idea that like there was just, you could get your fill of video games and there was an arcade in the mall. It was just such a video game paradise. And that's what I think of when I think of mall. So I'm kind of coin op in that way. And then like later, mid high school, later high school, when it was more go hang out at the mall yourself and like friend's got a driver's license and he can bring you. I remember there was one of the islands in the mall was a guy selling gray market DVDs, and he would just have a bunch of Hong Kong movies and a bunch of like extreme horror movies. So it was me going and talking to this, like me as like a 16-year-old talking to this guy in his 30s. It's just like, oh, you ever see the guinea pig movies? And he's like showing me like this like horrific stuff, and I'm like buying it from like, I'm just getting his, like whatever money I had went right into that DVD duplication scam. But it was great. I got such a it fed my cinephilia, which was already well going before that stand showed up. So those are the kinds of things I think of at the mall, like when I think of physical things. Yeah, I just like that idea of friendships and the specific friends I would go to the mall with and stuff, and the people we would see. Yeah,
I was more like you, Adam, as far as my comic book experience. Comic book shops were my earliest ones that I remember were flea markets, and then when it was fancier, it was the air conditioned booths at a flea market, and then maybe like the strip mall comic book shops, but there was the massive bookstores or the B. Daltons or the before his Barnes and Noble, I mean, Walden Books or whatever, like the big bookstores in there, and then maybe a movie theater depending on the fanciness of the mall. But as I was saying earlier, this hidden world of the malls can get quite creepy, the tunnels, all the nooks and crannies, but also depending on the age that you're in a mall, there's different appeals and kind of different anxieties and threats that can come into play. When you're very young, maybe it's the toy store, but also stranger danger and a little bit. Yeah. So there's these different levels to it. So with that, I'm curious, do you have any scary real life mall stories that kind of came to mind while you were working on this title? Anything that was pretty freaky for you from your mall experiences?
Oh, man. I don't think. No, go for it.
If you need a second, it's funny because it's not a scary thing. It's not like a campfire story thing. But I remember seeing a vicious fight at the mall food court. I remember, and it was like older too. It wasn't like a formative memory kind of thing. But I remember around the time of like 16, 17, around the time of like being like senior in high school, I think I remember just seeing like chairs thrown, like people bloody on the floor, like security absolutely just standing back, and then like finally cops like running in, like level fight at the mall. And I remember kind of I don't think it was a conscious thing on the book, but I just do remember that idea of like, oh wow, this happened like 15 feet from the Annie Ann's. Like this is like the veneer of civility can go out of the window so quickly if things go sideways. Like I remember like that being, I hadn't really thought about it until I hadn't thought about it until right now in connection to this book at all. But I kind of think about it occasionally. It was like, I remember like just that awful fight. Like it was just like, So something like that idea that like you're a safe space that suddenly becomes not safe, like within an instant.
Yeah. Well, and something that you do very explicitly kind of play into in the book is this, the containment element of it. When the civility goes out the door, you're still stuck there, and suddenly you realize maybe there's just not enough exits that I'm seeing, or maybe where do I go to get away from this fight or this threat? So, I think that both expansiveness and then claustrophobia, both kind of simultaneously existing, is represented in the book. David, how about you? Was there anything that you thought of?
There wasn't anything kind of perspective altering quite like that, but more in terms of I'm gonna out my. I mean, we were all dumb as high schoolers, right? So the mall, because it was more sheltered and air conditioned, was kind of our stomping grounds, right? And so that meant that us as teens, we just got really comfortable with the area. That was our area. And as a kid, I was an idiot. I saw a movie that built me up, and so I was like, I'm gonna steal a ring. I'm gonna do it, and just screwed it up completely, and immediately got hauled into those back rooms, right into that. That security place was banned for the mall from the mall for like 6 months, which is probably, now thinking back on it, was probably the lightest thing that could have possibly happened. It was a slap on the wrist and don't do that again, idiot. Don't steal rings from mall kiosks. But I remember that kind of turning the mall this safe space with all the bright lights and the posters and the bright colors kind of on its head, right? Because you get yanked back into those worker areas, and all the walls are just stark white. It's just bright fluorescence. Everything's slate gray. You sit on that blue plastic chair for an hour until your dad comes and gets you, and it's just like it showed me like the stark, scary real world behind the facade that was the mall, right? And I'd like to say that like that made me aware of life as a kid, and like I didn't ever do anything stupid again, but I was an idiot kid. But that moment was like was a true shift of being like, oh, like the things that I thought were kind of around are the mask on top of everything, and there are these workings behind it, sort of thing. You
have to tell me then what this movie was that you saw that amped up this kind of.
Yeah, you want to hear it?
Adolescent.
It's not a good answer, man. It was the Ben Affleck Daredevil.
You came out of Daredevil and you're like,
I'm a steel ring.
Thieves that beats up.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I'm not proud of it. I'm not. It's not.
You chose to be Bullseye, not Daredevil.
I don't know exactly why I was the way I was, but it was. Yeah.
I also just appreciate. There's some level of irony here. I'm working it out, but I appreciate that a Ben Affleck Daredevil movie turned you into a thief, as opposed to Ben Affleck from Mallrats.
There you go. That's a good point. That is a good point. I don't know what it was. The movie got my adrenaline going, and I was just like, I'm gonna do this. I don't know. I felt invincible after watching that movie. I guess I have no answer that's going to make this a cooler story.
I just feel like I don't want to harp on this too much, but you really took the wrong message out of it. It's like, do you watch Star Wars and get tempted to build a massive space station, planet destroying space station?
I do have a 3D printer, so we'll see.
See, there you go. Well, and beyond malls, I'm just curious, since you guys you're existing in this horror world, what about other urban legends or scary stories, maybe like the strange encounters with humans that were not quite right? either from your upbringing, the scary house at the end of the block from your old neighborhood, or maybe other things that just fascinate you that's also scary out there. Adam, why don't you start? I mean, it might involve clowns and cornfields. I'm guessing.
Exactly. I love it all. And I've built, I've literally like built a career now on the idea of like that, like viral videos of, clowns coming out and menacing people. It was that little kernel of how do you build a book around that? And and I went the slasher route. I went the kind of terrestrial route. And because that's a series, because I was writing books before that, a lot of people who are readers and like my stuff still like talk about those books as if like they're the beginning of my career. I wrote like 10 books before that. And the vast majority of them are speculative, have a either a supernatural element or something that, tangibly, quote unquote, couldn't really happen, in the straight world kind of. But Dead Mall was partly born out of that itch of like, let's get back into the weird and speculative and the paranormal, because I had been in the kind of terrestrial clown in the cornfield world for so long. I was like, I want to write about something that scratches that itch of I've always loved, kind of like you said, the idea that the strange and unusual, and I equate it so closely with Americana. Almost all my books, except for one, are set in America, or about very American things in different parts of the country. And I love that. I love the folklore of this country, and I love the cryptids of this country. And I love so it's almost none of my books are explicitly about those things, but it's just my general interest in these areas that informs what I choose to write about. And I think it's that idea of almost like, yeah, I love hearing about stories of the Mothman so much. And I love like things like that. And it's that writer in me that wants to not write stories about the stories I've heard. I want to almost tell myself a new mythology. And I think that's what keeps me writing, and what keeps me writing in this genre, I think is a huge part of it. It's that idea of, I actually keep that separate from that part, because we were talking a little bit before we started recording. We were like, oh, we follow a lot of the same people on Twitter. And it's like, I think it's that it's watching shows like the shows you're on and listening to podcasts and hearing kind of, nonfiction accounts of these things is what I do in my off time, because otherwise, as my family knows, I'm like constantly thinking about work. So I think the idea of like the Clown in the Cornfield books, the Dead Mall, Video Night, they're all their own mythology. They're all their own things. I get to not think about research and writing about these real world things, because I save that as a little treat for myself. I save that as my own thing I like to do in my own area of interest.
Yeah. And well, I mean, like it's also, I mean, it's fun to think about. I mean, it could be scary and creepy and whatnot, but it's also fun to think about. But as far as the Americana component of it, even though you don't say this explicitly, and I could be entirely wrong, but something I really love about Dead Mall is, even though you have all these other horror elements happening, this Lovecraftian, almost elder god that's been almost consigned to having to form into a mall is both sad. Like this elder god ancient entity is almost sad that it has to become a mall, and yet it's so Americana and on point that it's like only only exists here.
No, of course Cthulhu would be a Macy's, Like it's, my favorite bit of the book is what the mall is, and its attitude towards it. That idea of great cosmic power, he's so cocky. The mall is so cocky. And you're like, it's because he feels all powerful, but you also do step back, and it's like, pal, you have a Sears home center inside you, that. It's like that idea of it's such a silly
food court, my guy.
disposable thing. Yeah, exactly. Like the Sakura Japan is right around the corner. Like you are not this be all end all ultimate power. Like I do like that about it, I think that's definitely intentional, unintentional, subtextual in the book.
Yeah. the nexus of evil is J.C. Penney's.
Yeah, for sure.
David, I wanted to hear about any kind of urban legends or stories from your childhood, or the creepy old house on the block that stuck with you. I mean, I know Phoenix has a lot of great tales and folklore.
Oh, Phoenix does, yeah, absolutely. And growing up, folklore about we had a Navajo reservation just north of us, so folklore about like skinwalkers and things like that were large in our imagination and fairly formative, I think. And I think that kind of that did kind of trickle into I love liminal spaces and things that shouldn't be, right, like not deer in Appalachia and things like that, or like staircases in the woods that lead to nowhere, and you go up them and you disappear forever, and things like that. Ideas like like fairy culture and things like that. Just things that hint at larger realities that are beyond what we can see and are still threatening through small ways that are that just kind of twist our perspective are some of my favorite things. So legends about skinwalkers and mystics taking on different forms, and animals in the woods that are not what they should be, and things at night that call out your name, and if you hear them, no, you didn't, and those kind of things just I grab onto, and I love that. Things like the back rooms, recently are things that just kind of touch my heart, near and dear, and I'm like, oh, I love that.
I love how the internet has kind of become its own folklore and has started its own areas of folklore. It's just so fascinating, from these things that were, like you're talking about the Navajo, and you're talking about these things that are very, very old, like older than settlers coming here. And then you have, within the last 15 years, this repository of like no sleep and creepypasta and all these things. And I think hucksterly and to sell books, and very much, I think David and I are very much like aware of the fascination of liminal spaces and videos of people walking around dead malls, and to the cover of the trade paperback, which is not David's art. It is the one piece of non-David art. Is that this cover is Trevor Henderson, who is just happened to do us a favor. He is a good friend who is very internet famous. Like, your kids know who he is. They know Slimy Swampy Ghost because he created Cartoon Cat and Siren Head and Little Nugget, and these characters that he just drew this thing, and now they have a life of their own, and there's hours and hours of YouTube videos talking about like the lore of these characters that it's not lore he created. It's just, he just drew a character, and they've almost entered this zeitgeisty area where you have people dressing up as Halloween costumes and stuff like that, of these, what are technically like his characters that have become, he's been subsumed by the internet. There's just this whisper network of the new folklore in a way. It's fascinating how the meme of idea and scariness and things that are the unconscious of the internet work. And I think that's, yeah.
I love it as well. And I feel like on one hand, we've got this we're adding to lore, as you said, and it also connects to things that have been before, either the iconography or the themes of it. It's things that keep kind of repeating and refreshing. But I also love that people seems like they have an appetite in researching the stuff that has come before, the old stuff, the old folklore, indigenous folklore, and multicultural folklore, and the ghost stories and monster stories from other peoples. Seems like there's an appetite too for that, and beyond just your Bigfoot and your ghost and your alien, going beyond even Mothman, like David said, into liminal spaces and fairies and all this stuff. It's almost like we're in this era, this new movement, the spiritualism, but of the weird. And that's where the fascination is. I love that. I love that as well. So, and I do think that Dead Mall kind of fits nicely within that. It's old, it's new, it's classic haunted house, and it's new haunted house, and it just kind of brings together so many different elements. So
I thank you for saying that, because it's very much what we're interested in, and it's just like it's so cool to hear that it worked for you as a reader, and we really, really appreciate it.
Well, before I let you guys go, just lay it on me. What's next? Any updates on adaptations? I know you're working on the Clown in the Cornfield movie, but we're in a weird time entertainment wise.
We're in a very odd time.
So anything you guys are working on that you can talk about? David, why don't you start?
I've got a couple of projects that are kind of in the pitch stage, so not completely greenlit yet, but I've got, a bunch of things from kind of a cyberpunky action drama to a story about a guy whose job it is to assassinate imaginary friends, all of which are
I love that.
Great story concepts. And are we good to plug social media and stuff here? Is that cool?
Yeah, please.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you want to figure out what I'm doing next, and or hear about possible maybe Dead Mall 2 things that happen in the future, you can follow me at Stoll Comics on everything, Twitter, Instagram. I'm Stoll_comics on TikTok, but Blue Sky as well. So.
I like how polite you were by asking if you could plug your social media.
I just started saying it. I just started.
Are you sure you're not from the Midwest? Or
I saw that Daredevil movie one time and I changed my mind.
Like 7 scared straight.
I love it. Adam, how about you? What can you talk about?
I've got so many things coming out before this, but the one thing that's actually been announced that I could talk about is Clown in the Cornfield 3. It's going to happen. The paperback for Clown in the Cornfield 2 comes out in like a couple weeks, maybe like a week from now. I can't ever remember. And bookstores get them out early. So like it might even be in your bookstore now. Please read them. They're really good. Please, but read Dead Mall before all else. Clown in the Cornfield 3 is the first 2 books are a slasher and a slasher sequel, and like my idea version of that, and my pitch to my publisher and my editor for Clown in the Cornfield 3 was the idea of I love these characters and I love these books and I would love to write them seemingly forever, even if I take breaks in between. So what is the key to longevity there? And the key to longevity is to introduce a different subgenre into what these books are and what they can be. And 3 is a departure. So I think of it in the way that Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, it's that idea of introducing, it's not like that in the way that that's an anthology and completely unrelated, but it's like that in that it's a departure, and fans of that franchise at the time were super pissed off, and then they got better. Like, and now it's not even like cool to say like what an underrated entry in the series. Like everyone loves that. Everyone and their brother love Halloween 3. So what I would hope is that Clown 3, we skip the part where everyone hates it, and then they immediately just like are like, oh, this is fun. So that, and I've got a whole nother book that's literally this is a hot exclusive. It's going to come out this year, but it still has not been announced yet. I can't say anything, so it's going to be a little secret book that's not going to be little at all. It's very big, but it's not related to the Clown in the Cornfield series. And then we're working on some stuff, David and I, that we're hopefully going to be able to push through. So
and maybe,
and like he said, socials, it's just my name on everything, but I don't have Blue Sky yet, but everything but that. And if you're like, no, I can't listen to this guy talk anymore. Don't go to YouTube. Don't go to TikTok, because it is wall to wall me talking about mostly movies, even though I'm like a horror book guy. I sometimes talk about books, but I can't stop my cinephilia. So I talk about films online.
All right. And of course, Dead Mall, the horror comic published by Dark Horse Comics, available now in trade paperback, and hopefully more coming from that world. But my guests have been Adam Cesare and David Stoll, the creative team behind Dead Mall. Guys, I appreciate you joining me today. It's been a great talk. It's great nerding out with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. And for everyone out there, I'm Aaron Sagers. This has been Talking Strange. And until next time, be kind, stay spooky, and keep it weird.